Run the race. I remember in high school when I ran track and I ran the 100 and 200, a couple other events. I remember what it took to run the race. The race required my meal plans, my exercise to be on point. It required me to practice correctly and to practice on my technique and to practice on my movements to make sure I stretched. Running the race required a lot from me. But I was amazed at how much time, effort, and commitment went into people who were really focused on running the race. And especially those who ran long distance. Those who were what we call endurance runners. These people ran the mile, the 2 mile, and so forth. And what it took from them, from what I could see, my perspective, it took so much more than what I felt I was putting in. I felt like they were truly preparing for what it was, for what it took to run the race. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1, Paul reminds us that we need to run the race of faith. He reminds us that the race of faith is not easy. It requires a lot. It requires commitment. It requires for us to lay aside all the weights. It requires us to lay aside all the sins that hold us down and keep us captive and keep us bound. And so that we may run free with endurance the race of faith. Paul says, lay aside all the weights. That includes the weights of, insecurities, anxieties, worries, worrying that, am I good enough? Worrying about your confidence, your self-esteem, to lay aside all these things and instead to have faith. To be committed to running the race of faith because your faith is put in Jesus. To lay aside all the weights that hold you down and the circumstances that you feel are too much for you. To lay aside all the weights and instead allow Jesus to take up these weights and fix your problems. But not only does he say to lay aside the weights, but he says to let go of the sins that easily ensnare you, that easily ensnare us. The sins that keep us in cycles. The sins that we keep falling into time and time again, that make us feel like we're taking 5 steps forward and 12 steps back. It's like every time you feel like you're doing good and you're starting to read your Bible again and you're getting back to the devotionals and you feel like you fall again. You feel like it's back to square one. You feel that shame, that guilt. He's saying that let go of these sins to break free from the cycles. And I'm made aware that the only way I'm able to break from these cycles, the only way I'm able to do all these things, to achieve these things, is to have the Spirit of God in me. That the race of faith is not something that I'm able to do by myself, because by myself it won't work. And so I can call out to God and say, Lord, I need your help. Give me your Spirit so that I may run this race, that I may let go of these sins, that I may put aside the weights, that I may push forward. But third, I realized that Paul says something profound: to run the race of faith with endurance. Not only to lay aside the weights, not only to let go of the sins and the temptations that hold us bound so that we can run freely. Because if you realize runners don't run with a lot of extra weight on them. You don't want to run with extra baggage, but you want to run free. You want to be able to run free and so that you can move. But that also you need to run with endurance. The race of faith is not an all-out sprint until you're gassed out. But it's also not a race to where you go at a snail's pace and you think, I have all the time in the world and I'll really get started when I feel like it. No, he says run with endurance, which requires you to run every day, to press on, to push forward. That even when you feel like you're falling, you continue to push forward. And even when you fall, if you need to crawl, you crawl forward. And that every step is a step forward. That even when you feel like you're falling back into these same sins, you may fall, but you're no longer falling backwards. You're now falling forwards. You're now trusting God to bring you through, to pull you through, so you continue to press on. You push forward You run the race with endurance, the race of faith. And we realize that if we run the race of faith with endurance, when we allow ourselves to run free, when we lay aside all the weights, the circumstances, the situations that hold us bound, when we let go of these sins that keep us captive, when we ask the Spirit of God to break the chains from us and to clean our mind and to reset our mind and to restore us and renew us, we can now run the race of faith with endurance. We can press forward. We can press on. We can run the race.